Hello everybody. This is the second video in the final lecture in my chain ladder method series. In it, I'm going to talk you through how I take my draft selected results from the chain ladder method to a final position which is reliable and justifiable. I'll cover how I go about fixing later origin periods where the chain ladder method may not be reliable, as well as signposting where a completely new method is required. Then I'll talk about the final checks the modeller should undertake before handing over their work to the peer reviewer. Let's start with a checklist. Moving from draft to final result is an iterative process where we'll make decisions at steps 1 and 2, then go through the next 2 steps, checking that our changes look reasonable. If the final results pass the test, then you can complete the documentation of your work and reflect back on a job well done. Actually, you're not quite done, as we still need to pass the peer review stage, but still it's a landmark to be celebrated in any case. If you aren't happy with the final results, then head back to steps 1 and 2 to refine your selections further based on what you've learned from the checking steps. As with appraising draft results, many junior actuaries skip this step, but it's essential to building predictive models that are reliable and justifiable. As usual, I can pick up very quickly whether this stage has been undertaken when I'm peer reviewing, and as usual I will lose confidence rapidly if I start spotting obvious errors or anomalies which should have been caught at this stage. But do things the right way and you'll see how much it's appreciated by senior actuaries, as well as giving you confidence in your own work. Let's start with step 1. Based on all the work we've done to date, we should have a clear and documented view of which origin periods we believe the chain ladder method is appropriate for and where it's not. Having done so, we should end up with one of these 3 possible outcomes. Outcome 1 is that we are comfortable with our chain ladder models for all origin periods. If we're modelling a segment which has sizable, stable volumes of business with a high frequency and low severity, and there are no major distortions to the policy life cycle, then this can and does happen. When I'm modelling a short-tailed property damage segment, for instance, it's quite likely that I can build chain ladder models which successfully replicate the policy life cycle. In this case, I simply save my draft results as final, skip step 2, and move on to the checking steps. Outcome 2 is most common where I've done careful, considered modelling that is reliable, but the development is just too immature in the last few origin periods. Or maybe there's a distortion to the policy life cycle in recent periods, and I just can't be sure that my chain ladder modelling is fully reliable. In this case, I move on to step 2, where I look to fix those last few origin periods to get to my final results. Lastly, there can be segments which are just not suited to the chain ladder method at all. Think about modelling latent claims where we might have little information on claims to date and huge calendar year distortions to our development data caused by things like legislative change or exposure mix issues. In this case, we'll need to use a different method entirely that is much less reliant on triangle data. As discussed before, there are a smorgasbord of actuarial reserving methods out there, so I won't cover these other methods here, but watch out for future videos where I will cover them. Now, you may be saying to yourself that there must be a 4th possible outcome, where say a random older origin period is inappropriate as well, but I would argue against that in 2 ways. Firstly, if there is something very exceptional in a back year causing this issue, then you might be better off dealing with it through better segmentation. So isolate this big issue in its own modelling segment and deal with it appropriately there without it distorting your modelling data for the rest of the segment. Secondly, we need to be careful not to nickel and dime the results, by which I mean that it is quite natural to get the odd origin year which looks a little bit optimistic and another one which looks a little bit prudent. We should not be overly concerned by slight variance in apparent prudence in those back years, and rather should consider a more aggregated view of the back years. The current year is going to be a focus for profitability assessment, but the back years will tend to be considered in totality by management, so swings and roundabouts in the back years should be tolerated, up to a point. Let's move on to step 2 and see how we can fix the results for later origin periods. Fixing is best done by considering standardised results. That is your absolute ultimate divided by some exposure measure. This ensures you pick up on genuine trends rather than being confounded by distortions such as growth or change in mix. In this example, I'm looking at ultimate claim counts divided by policy count to get frequency of claims. This segment seems to have a very stable frequency over time, which is excellent. I also know from my modelling notes that I don't believe the chain ladder modelling is appropriate for the 2020 origin year. I've indicated that with a solid red line. Let's just change the format to make things easier to see. Now, my reliable standardised results are shown in green, whereas my unreliable ultimates are shown in red. I've also zoomed in a little so we can see the detail. I can immediately see that my reliable green results give a very stable frequency trend, but the red 2020 origin period, where I'm much less confident, is showing a spike up in frequency. In fact, it gives the highest frequency ever seen for this segment. This is probably not something I want to retain in my final results unless I'm more confident about this finding. Such a finding would likely lead to interesting discussions with claims and underwriters, as well as management potentially taking rating action on this class. The fact that I've designated it unreliable suggests that there's no distortion in the policy lifecycle I'm aware of that would lead to such a change in frequency. And given how stable the frequency has historically been, I can probably be confident that I want to fix the frequency for 2020 to overcome volatility, which is probably caused by immature claim development in that origin period. So, how do we go about fixing frequency for 2020? Well, there are an infinite number of ways we could do this fixing, but the general concept is to use trending to predict a sensible value for the unknown origin periods. There are also many ways we can include or exclude data in our trending process. This is definitely an area which demonstrates my point about reserving being more art than science, but we can still set some guidelines to help us do the best job possible. Generally, the true but unknown trends in frequency and severity tend to be linear or exponential. That's not to say that we won't ever see what looks like a complicated polynomial shape in our trends due to volatility around these true trends, but it is to say that using complicated formulae are likely to overfit our problem and give us either unnecessarily complicated results or more likely incorrect ones. So, although there are plenty of machine learning solutions and Python libraries out there which you could use, you'll probably get as good a result by using Excel simple regression techniques. Next, we need to decide which historical data points to include in our fitting process. In the example on screen, I've included all the green historical data points to produce my dashed trend line. Again, this is a complicated decision, but one where we can set some principles to work within. So, principle number one would be to always include the latest reliable data point, so 2019 in this example. Principle number two would be to include as many historical link ratios as possible, subject to principle three, which is that we want to buy into known trends in our segment. So for example, if we know that we've been growing into a new area for the past 5 years, which we expect to change our frequency, then we might choose to include only the last 5 years of historical link ratios. If we're not aware of such a change, then we might choose to include all the historical data to give us a stable trend line. In the example on screen, the trend line gives us a sensible looking frequency for 2020, circa 15%, and all else being equal, I would probably be happy to select this. Lastly, we should include a series of historical data points without exception. If we had an odd historical data point distorting our fit, say 2015, then either only include data points after it, i.e. 2016 onwards, or go back far enough to avoid 2015 having too much influence, i.e. go all the way back to 2011 in this example. Be very careful if you start cherry picking which data points to include, as you're very likely to introduce bias through doing so. Let's look at how we could fit a different trend to this data. So here I've chosen a different base period to apply the trend line to, just using data from 2015 to 2019. This would be done if the 2014 and prior data was deemed unrepresentative of future development, and you can see that we now get a slightly increasing trend in frequency over time. However, the projection for 2020 is not that different to before, but still at around 15%, which is unsurprising as the historical data all look very consistent and close to 15%. One thing we need to be careful about is extrapolating trends seen over small historical periods a long way forward into the future. This can be necessary when we're concerned about unearned business as much as earned, for example looking to estimate Solvency II premium provisions. This chart shows an example of where things don't look right. I've chosen a short base period, 2015 to 2018, and I'm projecting it way out to 2029, by which point the trend is out the top of my chart. I'd need to have heard strong messages about such a trend in my preparatory work to buy into such a projection. If I'm just deriving this mathematically, then I probably need to think again and use a longer base period in my trending. So don't just apply the fixing without thinking. Remember all the information we gain from our prep work and use it during the fixing process. Then save it down as final and move on to the next step. Step 3 in our finalising results checklist is to compare our final results against last time. It's very rare that we do a project once and once only, so we normally have historical results to compare to. These historical results have been through the mixture of discussions with key stakeholders and revisions, so should be a solid baseline to compare to. We should be able to explain why we've changed our position from last time too, so this is an important step in justifying and documenting our work. There are 4 different ways we can compare against last time. That is, single origin development charts, absolute amounts, standardised amounts, and bridging. Let's start with single origin development charts. This example is showing the claim number development for the 2015 origin year against this time and last time's ultimates. We can quickly see that both closed and reported claims look to be heading to our ultimate, and we can also barely see a difference between this time and last time's ultimates. So this is very comforting, and we can say that our ultimate for the 2015 origin year looks reasonable. Naturally, we'll need to look at a chart like this for each of our origin years to get comfortable with them all individually. Let's look at an example where things don't look so good. When I look at this chart, I immediately prefer last time's ultimate to this time's. This time we seem to be holding a high ultimate that the claims development is not heading towards. I need to have a very clear story as to why we've selected a more prudent position. For example, a known backlog in claims reporting. But it's more likely that we've made a mistake and need to reassess our ultimate for this origin year. This chart is comparing our absolute results against last time. We can see that the comparison is very close for all origin years, and there's only a divergence in 2020. It's hard to know from this which version of the truth for 2020 is correct. So I'd probably give this a pass and move on to the standardised results comparison. However, before we do that, let's look at an absolute results comparison that would concern me. So here we seem to have a mismatch between this time and last time. I'd be very surprised to see differences across all years like this, as many of the older origin periods should be well through the policy life cycle and so limited potential to move between reviews. This kind of issue suggests either a data error or a data restatement. Both are important for us to understand and correctly allow for. It might be that we've modelled claim numbers including nils this time, but excluding nils last time. We need to be able to justify such a change in any case. This chart is comparing our differences over time on a standardised basis, looking at frequency of claims. When we looked at the same information on an absolute basis, it wasn't clear which ultimate was better. But by standardising, we can clearly see that this time's ultimate, in grey, is much more aligned to historical trends than last time's in gold. I'd want to understand what drove us to be happy last time, and what's changed to move 2020 back into line. Were we informed of a distortion to the policy life cycle which now seems to have dissipated? Sounds like an important message needs to be delivered on the back of our work. Conversely, if our standardised chart had looked like this, then I would be concerned that we've done something wrong this time, as the frequency has dropped like a stone in 2020, whereas that trend was not apparent last time. Again, we should not be anchored to last time, but we do need to be able to explain why we've changed our position so markedly. Never ever say, well, this time is right, or similar. We should have gone through all these same checks and balances last time and been confident in our work. So don't discredit yourself in an attempt to justify this time's work. I've spoken a lot about ensuring we can explain the movements from this time to last time, and it can be very helpful to create a step-by-step bridge like this to aid our understanding and our ability to communicate to our stakeholders. So this waterfall chart is moving from last time's ultimate in gold to this time's ultimate in grey via 4 steps, covering drivers of change in methodology, assumptions, data, and other. I'm not going to explain how to calculate this chart. That's enough material for a whole other video. But I will say that it can be very helpful to break down movements between reviews like this. The first 2 steps here pick up our subjective actions and show how much we've influenced the results. We should be fully aware why and when these have happened, and should be documenting the reasons behind such changes. The third step picks up the impact of objective changes in the data. This is important for noting how volatile the data is. We'd expect this to be close to 0 for stable classes, and so high values here would draw our attention to those trickier classes which need more attention. The last step is a catch-all for anything left, which again should be close to 0, and so it's a great check that we've done our calculations correctly. This is just 1 year, but it can also be helpful to see this for a segment or class in aggregate across all origin years. This will again help draw our attention to the key changes over the period, so we can ensure our work is robust, justifiable and well documented. As usual, if things don't look correct, then we need to loop back to step 1 in our finalising results checklist and make amends. However, assuming we're happy, we can now move on to the 4th step, where we will be reviewing the final results summaries. Okay, we've come to the final check you will do on your work before it's ready to be fully documented and handed over to the final reviewer. Again, this is an important step, but one which is often missed by junior actuaries. As a reviewer, I would normally start my review by looking at the results summary, and I can very quickly spot oddities and errors which I will expect you to be able to explain. My first boss used to look at my results summaries, look me in the eye and say, "There's something wrong here and I just need to find it." The fact that he couldn't helped build up his confidence in my work, but you should have seen him if there was a stupid mistake. So do yourself a favour and spend 5 minutes reviewing the results summary of any segment you've modelled and check there's nothing obviously wrong and that you can explain anything which looks even a little unexpected. Let's run through this abbreviated summary to check for anything odd. The AEP, average earned premium, has jumped up a lot. It's about 5% growth per year, which might be okay, but probably worth checking your modelling notes in case there's a story behind that. Few claims remain open at the end of the triangle, so that's reassuring for our chain ladder methodology. We're not projecting new claim numbers beyond the end of the triangle, which again is reassuring. Ultimate numbers look stable, and frequency looks stable too, and is at a sensible absolute level. Okay, next rows. Paid and incurred, both pretty low in 2020, so we're probably relying on fixing here. So even more focus on whether the metrics for 2020 look sensible is needed. We've dropped our 2020 ultimate by about 20% since last time, which is concerning. Do we feel fully able to explain that movement? Severity has shot up over the years, which looks concerning. Did that premium growth come from taking on bigger risks? Did we discover that in preparatory steps? Are we allowing for this in our modelling? Burning cost, which is equal to ultimate amounts divided by exposure, has jumped up alongside the severity. 125% loss ratio for 2020 looks odd, and way above the average of 76%, which looks more sustainable. I'd want to ensure I had a strong story before heading into my review of 125% loss ratio on the latest year, particularly as there's little actual claims data in 2020 to back that up. Have I messed up my fixing? Perhaps I need to head back there and reassess. Lastly, IBNR to outstanding ratio looks quite variable. I think that this is often the case, and I get less excited by odd IBNR to outstanding ratios than most other metrics. One word of warning though, auditors do not appreciate it when you add IBNR to origin periods with no outstanding claims. It's one of their standard checks. So if you see an IBNR to outstanding ratio of infinity, make sure you're really happy with the IBNR you've put on that seemingly dead year. So we've completed the 4th step of our finalising results checklist. Now we can save down our results as final and they're ready to head off to peer review. However, before you click send, make sure you've documented everything important. We want to be open about the challenges we faced and which the peer reviewer should be most concerned about. We want to have that great conversation with them and learn from their experience as they explain how they would like to deal with these tricky issues. So get your modelling notes updated, get your executive summary completed with the key points that will drive your review meeting, and then send off your well thought through, justified and documented work to the reviewer. Great job. Well done. So hopefully you can now see how we go about taking our draft results to a final position and how to appraise those final results before sending to your peer reviewer. In the next video in this series, I'll cover off how your peer reviewer will quickly dissect and analyse your results to home in on the key issues. This will help you to ensure your work sails through the peer review stage, leading to senior people's confidence in you growing. As usual, please also like and subscribe to support these videos, and do let me know your comments and feedback on these videos in the comments section below. Thank you.